Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this Forrester and Agiloft webinar entitled Elevating Contracts. We have two panelists for today's discussion, Andrew Bartels, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester, and Andy Wishart, who is Chief Product Officer at Agiloft. I'll serve as your moderator. Since we have two Andys on the panel today, I'm going to refer to Mr. Bartels as Andrew and Mr. Wishart as Andy.
You can never have too many Andys.
Yeah. So the presentation, next slide please, the presentation part will be followed by a Q&A session. Attendees will be on mute during the presentation part, but please submit your questions in the appropriate window in the Zoom platform at any time, and the panelists will address them during the Q&A portion. So, Andrew, you've been doing research on the role of contracts and the contracting process for 20+ years. How has the field evolved over the years, and what value do modern systems of contract lifecycle management offer?
Thank you, Hiro. Thank you, Andy. Well, as you said, contracts, of course, been around much longer than I've been around, literally for centuries. But the role of contracts has, in the last couple of decades, has significantly increased. That's partly because contracts have moved out of the filing cabinet and become part and parcel of how business gets done today, especially in a digital world. So what really has happened with contracts today is it's a balance between the needs of business and the needs of legal. When I say balance, what we need to achieve today is to make contracts accessible to the business, as well as allow the business to create the contracts that they need to be able to do so quickly and effectively. At the same time, make sure we still retain all the legal controls of the contract process and the contract language that the folks in legal understandably want to make sure are retained. So that brings us sort of to one of the paradoxes of contracts. Go to the next slide, which is that they really play two quite different roles in business operations. One role is that they define who does what at what price when everything works as planned. It's essentially a way of defining relationship and what happens in that relationship in terms of transactions, value delivery, et cetera. On a day-to-day basis, that's going to be 95% of the contract value. That's what the contract does. It's used to make sure things happen when it's supposed to happen. But it's only about 10% of the contract language is devoted to that part of the contract. The other 90% of the contract language plays a different role. This is the role of contracts defining who is liable or responsible when things don't work out as planned. Now, day to day, that generally doesn't happen. Things work smoothly. But every once in a while, things go drastically wrong for various reasons. And that's when this other part of the contract language kicks in. So if you look at these two parts of it, it's really divided half and half between the defining of what gets done and the protection about who's responsible when things don't work as planned. This matters too, because very different stakeholders are going to look at the contracts through these very different roles that they play. And that'll be a theme we'll find as we talk through the rest of the session. So let's spend a moment to define what contract lifecycle management is. We've defined contract lifecycle management as a set of software tools, really a specific software product, that helps companies manage the contract lifecycle, the whole lifecycle of a contract. So first of all, it means supporting all the stages of the contract, from the drafting to negotiation, to the execution, the management, and ultimately to its replacement of the contract when its time to expire comes up. Second, it's about to support all kinds of contracts. Buy-side contracts with your suppliers, sell-side contracts with your customers, employment contracts, intellectual property contracts, any kind of contract should be supported by a CLM system. Now, one of the key aspects of contracts, of course, contract creation. And one of the key things we see here is a good interface that allows employees to access the system through the applications or interface they're most comfortable with. We highlight Word document interface here because for lawyers in particular, Word is the environment they live in. So making sure that you have a Word document interface is a key part of it. But not everybody lives in Word. Many employees work in other ones. So having a browser interface or an integration to other systems that they use is another part of it. So multiple points of interface into the contract process is a key requirement. Now the contracts, of course, end up being signed, but having been signed, they need to be in a place that they can be accessed by the transaction systems that need that data to execute the transactions effectively. This is one of the reasons that contract management has become so important, that as we move more and more of our purchasing systems, order management systems into online digital channels, the contract language needs to be accessible. That's why the contract repository looms large as the place where all the contract data is and where it can be presented to the purchasing system, the order management system, any other system that needs that data to make sure that when a transaction occurs, it's in compliance with the contract. Contracts are broad-based. You don't want to look just at individual contracts. You want to be understand the full contract portfolio. That means you want to have good contract analysis and reporting tools that can look across your contract portfolio and give you an insight as to the pattern of your contracts, the nature of contracts, who they're with, duplicates, changes, and reporting to be able to drill down and understand the full contract implications and aspects of it. Now, not all of the contracts will originate in your own system. In many cases, contracts will come from third parties. They'll come on their third-party paper. So you gotta have tools to import those contracts and bring them into your system and apply the appropriate metadata tags so you can find language that matches up to your own language. And contracts, as we'll see, don't exist in isolation. So you've got to have methods for linking the contracts and the contract data to the other process applications, the other applications that need those as part of the relationships for managing buying, selling, or other partner activities. So CLM systems are designed to handle all these aspects of the contract lifecycle. But let's break this down a little bit into, I'll call it 2 stages or 6 stages of value. Now, we use the word stages here because, in fact, this is a sequence of implementation. And each of these stages themselves are sources of value. One of the attractions of CLM is that you can implement in stages, and at each stage, you're getting business value from it. So this stage is not ironclad. Some companies follow different patterns on this. Some companies will start, for example, in the middle of contract creation. We found most clients follow this flow, where the very first step in their implementation is to put all their contracts in an electronic repository, where then accessible to anybody who has authority but needs to see the contract data, or any system needs that. Now that in and of itself has benefits. It cuts the cost of finding contracts. You don't have to call down to legal and say, hey, can you pull that contract? It also has the benefit of tracking renewals to make sure that contracts that you want to renew do get renewed, or contracts you want to expire don't automatically expire and leave you stuck with that. Next stage of value is, okay, we've got the contracts in the repository, what's in there? So reporting and analysis of the contract portfolio is typically the next stage. You want to look for duplicates, you want to look for conflicts, you want to understand the obligations, you want to look for rights, you want to find how many contracts do we have with company A or partner B. One of the major value props from CLM is around contract creation. One of the reasons companies adopt contract is to put the contract creation process into the hands of the people who need those contracts, salespeople, procurement people, other people, so that they no longer have to call down or email down to legal saying, can you create a contract? They can create it themselves. But when they do so, have all the controls so when that contract's created, it has only the language that's appropriate. It doesn't have language that should not be in there. And if there's any deviations, it can be flagged by legal, be sent to legal with flags to alert them, say, look at this language, it's been changed. Is this okay or not? Or a salesperson can, that wants to provide a discount to a customer, have it routed to the head of sales to say, yes, we can agree that or not. So workflow, as we'll see later, is a key part of contract creation. But it has benefits now in terms of much more efficient use of legal staff. Lawyers don't have to read every word of each contract. They can concentrate on when the system tells there's an issue, but otherwise focus on other problems. That leads to faster cycle time. You can get contracts completed much more quickly. And of course, faster cycle time means that you can accelerate revenues or savings. This is a key issue on sales contracts, which, as many people know, clients have learned to wait till the last day of a quarter to finalize the contract. If the contract's stuck in legal, you just can't book it this quarter, but CLM allows you to get that done quickly, get the revenues this quarter. That matters a lot. Contracts, as we'll see a little bit later, don't exist in isolation. The contracting activity fits with broader business processes. A lot of these business processes are what we call upstream applications. In the sales side, the lead and relationship of developing a relationship that turns into a proposal, that turns into a contract. So having that same interface, a common interface, so an employee can easily skip from one activity to another, is a key benefit. Or on the procurement side, from sourcing to contract. Once a contract is in place, though, of course, you don't want to just leave it there. You want to integrate that contract terms into transaction systems that need that data, need to be able to execute transactions, whether those are purchasing transaction, invoice transaction, customer service transaction, make sure that transaction is compliant to the contract. But ultimately, one of the big goals of CLM is to improve your contracts, improve your contract process, to identify ways in which your contracts were not delivering the value expected. They did not contingency that you thought they should have. They weren't structured in the appropriate way. And then go back and improve the contracts to get better results the next time. Typically, we see companies work through these in stages, but at each stage, you can still be confident that you will get business value at each stage of the process. Oh, Hiro, I think you had a question on that.
So thanks, Andrew. That's a great summary about the value of CLM, and I love how you put that into stages so that the value they're extracting at each stage of maturity. Andy, how did these sources of value track to what customers are actually seeing?
Yeah, good question, Hiro, and great overview, Andrew. So from my perspective, I think it's the role of CLM vendors like ourselves at Agileft to be creating CLM product experiences that make it frictionless for organizations and contracting professionals to be progressing rapidly through these 6 key stages. And I think that's because progressing to the next step in this sort of maturity model taps into disproportionately greater value than the prior step. And to make this rapid and frictionless progression, I think requires a strong foundation for the contract repository at step 1. There are hundreds of contracting solutions and tools out there that are offering basic repositories to unlock some of that early value, but most don't provide the agility or extensibility that's needed to ladder to the next steps in that value chain. And for us at Agileft, our CLM repository is data-centric, not document-centric. And by that, we mean that we put an emphasis on the relationships that exist between the contract record and other important associated assets to that record. And that's really necessary in order for customers to see that bigger picture on individual contracts and across the portfolio as well. So that they can see the relationship between the contract record and the document, the contract itself, or the entities in the contracting relationship, whether that's vendors or customers or partners, but also the relationship to internal stakeholders or approvers on that contract chain, and the different teams and departments that that contract belongs to, or the clauses within the agreement or the obligations that you're trying to measure and track. And I think this sort of holistic view of the contract unlocks the benefits of being able to more easily find contracts, looking at families of contracts across the portfolio, tracking and identifying obligations. And you have to be able to measure, track, and analyze these items in order for that latter stage of process improvement. And I think the strong foundation that is data-centric also needs to be super flexible too. You'll hear us at Agileft talk about the importance of Agiloft as a no-code platform. And what that means is that we offer our customers the ability to configure custom data models, custom views, custom rules and workflows, all through an intuitive administrator user interface that doesn't require any coding. And your organization may need to track specific contract data that is perhaps unique to the type of product you are selling, or is unique to the geographies in which you're purchasing services. And you need to have a CLM solution that offers that extensibility and flexibility. So I think overall, it's important to have that strong data-centric but flexible starting point in order to be able to progress through to the higher stages of value.
Great, thanks, Andy. So Andrew, it looks like the contracting process reaches across the organization. Who are the key beneficiaries of CLM software?
Well, that's one of the challenges of CLM, is that it probably touches more stakeholders than almost any other application that's used by an enterprise. Obviously, it touches legal. You're really dealing with legal documents, legal contracts. And so legal is very, very concerned about that. Legal's role in this is somewhat focused on the front-end activities of creating the contract. So you'll find legal very much concerned about contract repository, very much concerned about reports and analysis, very much concerned about contract creation. But once a contract's signed, legal tends to step back. There are other stakeholders who become much more interested at that point. For example, CPOs and head of sales. Yeah, they really are concerned about contract creation, especially the legal, especially the sales department, because as I said, if you can close deals, if you can streamline the approval process for deals for a head of sales, that matters a lot given the time of deals. But they also look very much about how do we link CLM into the other applications that my employees are using. On the purchasing side, what they're using, on the sales side. And they're also looking, again, since they often have responsibility, for making sure that the deals that were done and memorialized in the contract are in fact lived up to through the execution systems. So these have traditionally been the major stakeholders of CLM, but we're seeing some new stakeholders emerging. As CLM repositories and now analytics come to play, CFOs are waking up, oh, you mean there's a system that can tell me how much contract, what's the value of contracts we have, how much of our revenues are contractually committed, how much are conditional, can tell me how much of our purchasing are committed. I need that intelligence. I need that data to understand the financial implications of our contracts. And CIOs are active, not just as implementers of contracts, but actually users. Because CIOs are big buyers of stuff and they need reports about the status of contracts they have with suppliers. They need big ones about how do we make sure that when we're making purchasing of our software, our hardware, other services, we're in compliance with that. But lastly, there's that issue of contract optimization. And here's where both legal and CFOs are coming back into the mix when they're looking to say, look, this contract portfolio we've built, is it meeting our needs? Is it handling all the contingencies that keep coming along? Are we adequately protected from a risk and legal perspective? Is it giving us the kind of insight we need from a financial perspective, giving financial results? Are we actually getting the kind of commitments we want? So that contract optimization is again creating stakeholders around CFOs and around general counsels who are looking at this. And there are other stakeholders, not just these. For example, chief risk officers are becoming engaged. Even chief operating officers and CEOs are becoming stakeholders. So you've got a lot of stakeholders involved, but each of them are typically looking at it through their own lens of issues that they want to have addressed. And that makes it complex from an implementation perspective, because you've got to align all the stakeholders and make sure everybody's engaged at the appropriate time, at the appropriate point. Now, let's dive just for a moment, though, about how different people use CLM. For sake of simplicity, I've broken into 5 categories: the contract initiators, the contract reviewers, the contract managers, the risk managers, the financial analysts. As you can see, I'm not going to go into detail here, but each of these have a separate set of goals. Contract initiators, they want contracts done quickly, and so they need ease of use, linkage to other applications, they want e-signature integration. Contract reviewers, they want to make sure the new contracts are in line with company policy. And so the integration with Word and workflow and routing alerts on issues. Contract managers say, okay, the contract's in place. I got to use this to manage the contract and the customer relationship, supply relationship. So of course I want access to the contracts, but also links to other relevant data and other dates and data alerts on issues. So I'm prepared for those. Risk managers need to understand the risks and obligation of the contract portfolio. So they need analytics to do that. And so I refer to CFOs, they want to understand the financial implications and impacts of the contract portfolio on costs and revenues. So they need analytics that will give that kind of lens of insight into the contract portfolio. So these different stakeholders, different needs have to be reflected both in the CLM system, but also have to be reflected in how you go about implementing a CLM system to make sure these needs are being addressed.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Andrew. So Andy, this is a pretty diverse group of folks. How do you accommodate the different needs of such a varied group when designing a contract management system?
Yeah, so obviously having such a diverse range of different types of users or personas, we have to take all of that into consideration when we're designing the CLM solution, the product. And there's often nuances inside each of those personas as well. You know, take, for example, the contract initiators. There are different types of initiators dependent on the type of activity that they're doing. They'll be using different applications in their day-to-day workflow, dependent on whether they're buy side or sell side. And you know, at Agileft, we're constantly working with our customers and our users to build a deep understanding of these day-to-day workflows and activities, and to use that to help understand how the contracting process will interface with it. Maybe just as an example, if the user is working on a sales opportunity in Salesforce or Dynamics 365, they need the contracting process integrated into that CRM experience. And you know, we're focusing on, we've recently built our Salesforce and Dynamic 365 connectors, and are continuing to place a lot of emphasis on refining those user experiences for those types of users. I'm maybe thinking perhaps about the contract reviewers. I think the point that Andrew makes around the need for integration with Microsoft Word is such an important one. You know, you've got to meet the contract reviewers in their day-to-day productivity tools. I think that's really hugely important. And for most lawyers, that tends to be Microsoft Word, Microsoft Outlook, you know, both on the desktop, but also increasingly as we're more distributed in Microsoft 365 online. You know, but the great thing about Microsoft 365 and the Microsoft ecosystem is that they've created an extensible platform that makes it possible for CLM vendors like ourselves to create compelling and sophisticated experiences on that platform. So coming up in the end of this month, we have Agileft Release 22, and we're really excited about the new Agileft Contract Assistant for Microsoft Word that is tailoring for not just contract reviewers, but also the contract managers as well. So for contract reviewers, they're able to analyze incoming, inbound third-party agreements, you know, to automatically tag key facts directly inside Microsoft Word and identify clauses within those third-party agreements, and then synchronize that data back to the Agileft contract record without leaving Microsoft Word. Contract reviewers can also access the repository of the clause library to use pre-agreed clauses in negotiation of those contracts. And then for our contract managers, we're also interfacing in Microsoft Word, giving them the tools to help create those clause libraries in the first place. So their starting point may be a precedent document, a good example of a contract that they would like, that has the language in it that they want to be standard, and they can easily drag and drop that and add that into the clause library. So I think that Microsoft Word experience is really important. But overall, I think the diversity of needs of different users across all of those stakeholders is almost like a product manager's dream, the sort of different experiences that you have to create for each of those personas. And diversity in those users means also diversity in the experiences that you have to build into a CLM solution.
Great, thanks, Andy. So when you have multiple stakeholders, each with a finger in the pie, to use Mr. Bartels' analogy, one of the challenges is navigating multiple workflows which are unique to each group or each department. Andrew.
So I think, as Hiro just noted, because you've got these stakeholders that are involved, in many cases they'll be involved at the same time. But they have to work on the work objects and hand it work from each other. So that's why workflow is a key element in the stage of a life cycle. Now, which again, coming back to what the life cycle involves, the contract drafting negotiation, the third-party contract importing, the contract storing repository, the contract compliance and administration, the contract optimization, the contract renewal. Each of those stages will, to greater or lesser degrees, have workflow. Workflow is particularly important, workflow engine, in 4 of the stages. Most importantly, perhaps in the contract drafting, where you'll have one party who initiates it, but other parties have to look at it, maybe make changes, make amendments, has to be passed back and forth. You've got to keep track of who's seen it, where it stands, and make sure that all the appropriate parties have checked it off and done so in a timely fashion, and nothing is left there. Similar story happens with third-party contracts. Those come in, but now you've got this look and see which part of language can we live with, which ones can we change. Different people will have to weigh in on different parts, some on the business terms, some on the legal terms. Got to be able to have workflow to pass those thought processes, those items from one part to another. In terms of contract compliance administration, a little bit more simple, but still you have issues here that have to be passed from one part. Did that counterparty really do what they're supposed to do? Well, let's look and see. We need to alert somebody to take a look at the performance against this contract clause. Use workflow to route that. Did they do what they're supposed to? Yes, we got it back. No, they didn't. How do we factor that in? And of course, our contract optimization, we are looking to try and find where are the gaps in our contract? Where did things not go right? Again, workflow can allow, here's one gap. Okay, here's how we might remedy it. Pass that around to make sure it gets done. So workflow is a key element in CLM because the different stakeholders get involved at different stages. And one of the key differentiators I think that Agileft brings to bear is they have a very strong workflow engine. So Andy, you want to talk about that?
Sure. And I mentioned earlier about the importance of the Agileft no-code platform, enabling the creation of custom data models. If you need to track a specific contract data that's important to your business or geography or industry. Now that no-code capability also extends to the workflow in the Agileft CLM platform too. As we saw earlier on Andrew's prior slide, contract and workflows can be extensive and often complex in CLM use cases. Now we provide a lot of out-of-the-box workflows that are designed to meet the needs of most typical contracting workflows. But during your implementation, you're going to want to customize those to meet the needs of your organization. So the ability to create custom workflows that also work with your custom data models, that's really important. And you need to be able to do that quickly and efficiently without writing any code. And that's what the Agiloft no-code workflow platform enables you to do. And I agree with Andrew that Agiloft has a unique offering in this area of workflow. In many ways, you could say Agiloft sort of thrives with custom workflows. I think the second point that I would make around that no-code approach to workflow creation is about enabling lifetime client value. And I think that's important in two areas. The first is the need for ongoing flexibility. Now, things are going to change post go live or post implementation of your CLM system. You may want to add new contract types or push it out to new business units, or you might acquire another company that has unique needs. Or there will be changes externally that you're not able to predict. Changes might be in environmental, which we'll talk about in a moment, or compliance requirements or regulatory changes as well. And all of which needs a workflow solution that's adaptable and can change quickly too. And then when it comes to pre-go live or implementation, companies need to be able to implement CLM with pace and predictability. And during implementation, you're going to discover things that you didn't previously know. The act of going through the process will discover new challenges around your contracting process. So your requirements may adapt, or your priorities might be refined. And to complete implementations with pace and predictability, bring them in on time, I think is really dependent upon a workflow solution that's adaptable and can be changed quickly with you. Now, maybe we could just look at a couple of real life examples that speak to that importance of the Agiloft no-code platform and resulted in those customers being able to move at pace when things have changed. Now, the change that I'd like to focus on here is an environmental change. It's the change in the response to the pandemic over the last 12 months. Now, the first example is actually a vaccine manufacturer that's in the news, and their overriding concern was making sure that nothing for their COVID RNA vaccine trials would ever get stuck or slowed down. And they began by tracking all of their documents against a specific vaccine program. So this required the customer to extend their implementation, their CLM implementation, to create that data record of the program that the contract would be related to. And different programs would have specific requirements in terms of the language that would be included in the contract documents related to that program. And the flexibility of Agiloft enabled them to add those rules quickly and efficiently to accelerate the way in which those contracts are being managed. In the second example, it's the Children's National Hospital. Their goal was to expedite the creation of drive-through testing, and they worked with their supply chain and added new vendor management intake capabilities into Agiloft, and ensured that all selected vendors were now put through an expedited legal workflow. And that enabled the legal team to hit their SLA turnaround times of one business day. But more important than that, it allowed the organization as a whole to hit their system goals of 3 days to set up a drive-through testing facility. In fact, becoming the first pediatric hospital to open drive-through testing. Now, the third example is a regional health system, actually slightly detached from the core CLM use case. Their primary concern was overloaded nurses and doctors, that their normal shift patterns were thrown into chaos during the pandemic, and worked with our implementation team to create a shift tracking system on our flexible platform as well. And that involved adding additional tables to track immunizations, testing that they were participating in as well. So just an example of real life examples of that flexibility of that no-code workflow platform. Hiro.
Okay, great. Andy, so those are really strong proof points for how no-code helps customers adapt quickly in a crisis. Some of these examples seem to go beyond contract management. Andrew, thoughts on that?
Well, as Andy had kind of alluded to, it's important to remember that contracts, and therefore CLM, sit at the heart of at least three major corporate processes. One process is what we call the source to pay process, where contracts follow activities around spend analytics that's used to identify sourcing opportunities, then sourcing tools that are used to put out tenders and choose the suppliers you want to use. That, of course, then turn to a contract. That contract then has to be managed through a supplier relationship and then executed through procurement or invoicing. There's another process that plays through on the sales side. The lead management in a CRM system like Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics 365. There's a sales lead that then turns into a proposal, and they involve configuration, pricing, quoting to specify what's in the proposal. That once agreed upon becomes a contract, but once agreed then has to be executed, in some cases managing the revenue in the form of discounts and rebates associated with that contract, or simply managing the execution of that through the order management system. There's a third vector of integration we're finding, which is occurring from the legal operations side, where lawyers may be involved in CLM at one time, but also may be involved in legal matter management, or may be involved in other activities involved billing. And so you're seeing linkages of CLM to these processes. No, these linkages are more than just steps in the process. They are a key element that involves CLM being able to play well with the adjoining applications, to be able to support the people who are using these applications in different parts of their day. And so these vectors of integration, of intersection, are also vectors of both interface and integration that vendors in particular need to figure out how we're going to manage that, how we're going to link our CLM to another party's supplier management solution, how we're going to link it to a legal management solution, how we're going to connect these processes, the data, the workflow, the handoffs activities, and the interfaces between these ones. That's one of the major challenges that CLM vendors are facing.
Andrew, I think this is a great graphic, and obviously clearly depicts sort of CLM at the intersection of really critical processes within the enterprise. Yet I think despite that, contracts, being part and central to those processes, most organizations do not deploy a robust system of record to manage contracts that's then connected to these other processes. In fact, I think I would argue that contracts as a data asset are not really being treated as first-class citizens in the enterprise like other record types or systems of records. When I think about first-class assets in the enterprise, I think of things like customers and employees, vendors, the content that we produce for presentations or documents. And each of these first-class systems that we're familiar with the enterprise software categories and leaders of each of these enterprise software categories. But I think I feel like it's our mission at Agileft to help organizations elevate contracts to that same level of importance as these other assets and systems of record, and you know, to make contracts universally connected across the enterprise. And that will include connecting, and has to include connecting with these other systems of record and content systems as well. Now, when I think about the journey that we are on at Agileft, it's one to achieve this contracts elevated. And I'd like to just spend a little time showcasing some of our vision of how it aligns with that mission of elevating contracts. Now, we see 6 pillars that support that concept of elevating contracts. The first is relationship DNA. So what do I mean by that? I think contracts historically have been a shield, and it's been a useful construct. They're a fallback. They're the thing that you turn to when everything doesn't go well and you have to hold the line. But I think there's probably a more useful metaphor, and one that changes our view on the function of the contract, and one that perhaps modernizes our thinking, and that's contracts are relationship DNA. They're like a set of instructions. And just in this simple example that we have here, Agileft today, so the context here is looking at a contract, perhaps a third-party contract. Agileft today, with its use of AI machine learning models, can find the contract terms within the contract, can find the underlying clauses that relate to obligations. But what if we could go deeper into that DNA of the contract and find the events that trigger an obligation and the outcomes of those triggering events, and be able to capture that within the system as a live performance measure for that contract that's connected to our monitoring systems that are looking at service availability. So really connecting the DNA of the contract with other parts of the business system. And then the second pillar is proactive discovery. You know, what if the CLM solution was connected to an understanding of external events, such as compliance changes that can take a data feed of news and insights, and an insights engine that can then proactively identify those contracts within the portfolio that need modification or remediation. The third pillar is connected system of record. Now, our immediate product roadmap includes building on the integrations that we've created for Salesforce and Dynamics CRM, you know, to bring a common user experience and data integration framework across those leading enterprise apps. So in this example, we're seeing a user initiating a new Agileft contract from Dynamics 365. Now, the fourth pillar, democratized process. By this, we mean making contracting accessible to all of those personas that Andrew identified previously. It means taking the friction out of contracting and using technology to guide users through the contracting process. So if they're creating a new contract, they might not know what contract they're actually looking for. So we could guide them through that process. The fifth pillar is agile. And as we saw from Andrew's 3 vectors, CLM sits at the heart of major commercial processes. And Agileft's extensible modular no-code platform opens up the possibility for Agileft and our partners to create repeatable solutions and make them available to the Agileft ecosystem. And that could be solution accelerators for a specific industry, AI models for a specific geography, or an app that extends the core CLM functionality. In fact, we call this extension from CLM to those other critical business processes, CCLM. So that's contract and commerce lifecycle management. And we see a future where the creation of apps that extend to areas such as vendor management and spend management and others. In fact, the first module that we're going to be offering shortly will be a an RFX module to support sourcing, inviting vendors to respond within the Agileft platform, analyzing those responses, and initiation of the contract then is the final step of the award. The sixth and final pillar is connected business partners. And by this, we mean that the contracting process and the teams of contract approvers and managers that power that process are better connected to the rest of the organization. And one way to achieve this is through embedding of the contracting process into the everyday collaboration tools that business users and approvers are using. So that might be, for example, a Teams app where contract approvers are notified of approval requests, and where contract managers can search and actually ask a question of the contract. So that could be a conversational AI that is able to identify a limitation of liability amount and give the evidence for that limitation of liability as well. So those are just some of the product initiatives that form part of that overarching mission of ours to help organizations elevate contracts in their business. I think, Hiro, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. You made a compelling case for elevating contracts, so exciting. Andrew, assuming you buy into the argument that contracts are central to commerce, how do you go about showing the value of a CLM system?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we go back to those 6 stages that I talked about earlier. And in each stage, as I said, there's value. But what is also important is to then take that value and figure out a way of quantifying it, to identify what that translates into actual tangible benefits. So we said already in that first stage, business value is eliminating the cost of pulling contracts, avoiding auto renewal of contracts that should expire, avoiding expiration of contracts that should be kept. So what are benefits? Well, reduce legal operations expenses. Fewer people need to be involved in that activity of pulling contracts. But one of the other issues of benefits is making sure that we actually are keeping our spend or our revenues in line with what we want. If we look at the next stage of value, it's, as I said, it's some of the business value here is identifying duplicate contracts, contracts of non-compliant language. But it's also looking holistically across the whole contract portfolio to identify risks, entitlements, obligations that have financial implications of that. It's also a way of understanding your contractual commitments, both holistically across it, so you can avoid penalties for late or for failure to perform, late performance, failure to perform. But also there's entitlements you have, making sure that revenues that you're supposed to get, you're getting. Or savings you're supposed to get, you're getting. And of course, understanding and addressing risks before they happen, avoiding financial losses. Each of these have quantifiable benefits. If you take the time and effort, you can attach a number to say, here's what the benefit's going to be. The third stage of contract value is one that a lot of people get very quickly, and especially legal gets. As I said, allowing business users to create the contracts they need to close deals has a real value from a timing perspective, from a responsiveness perspective, ability to move that process along quickly. It also has real savings from a contract legal compliance perspective. One of the quantifiable benefits is how much time does it take your lawyers to review every contract? Now you can slash that dramatically down by almost as much as 90%, because now the system does that. And the system actually will do an even better job. And the lawyer will do it, because they're not going to get bored at page 250 of a 300-page contract and miss a key word on it. They're going to identify every deviation, flag it, and they're going to route it to the right people to say, is this okay or not? So legal now doesn't have to review every word of the contract. They can get called in when the system alerts them there's an issue, go directly to the issue, make a determination, get out, move on. We also talked earlier about cycle times. Faster cycle times in creating contracts now can lead to earlier recognition of contracted revenues or savings. There's a time value in money. You can associate that. Revenues that you book this quarter are more valuable than revenues you book next quarter. And there is, of course, those rogue contracts that exist out there that you realize after the fact, oh, why did we say that? Oh my God, we didn't, someone created that and now we have to live with it. That happens not a lot, but it does happen. It's painful. Again, how often does it happen? What's the damage? Estimating that. The next stage of value lies in the connection with upstream apps. This improves the efficiency, the work life of salespeople or vendor managers because they don't have to toggle in and toggle out of different applications. They don't have to go in a different place to find it. The data that they need about a relationship and the contract are linked together. They can find that in one place. That has financial benefits in terms of productivity. How many deals can be closed now because the salespeople don't have to spend as much time putting the contract together. Next stage of value in terms of integration is one that again has very easily quantifiable benefits. It's the automated execution of contract terms in the order management system, in the purchasing system, in the invoice system, even the customer service system. In the customer service system, the supplier may be, or customer may be entitled to gold level service. Well, you've been giving them platinum level. Guess what? They're unhappy about that. So now you can make sure, the customer service rep says, oh, contract says gold level. I'm going to make sure I do the extra mile with that. So financial results, increased compliance with an achievement of expected savings from your buy-side contracts. Increased compliance and avoidance of penalty and delivery of value to your customers on sell-side contracts. And avoidance of legal penalties or publicity or any other damages that can result when you don't meet contract terms. Maybe as simple as an unhappy customer who expected gold level service and now got bronze, then as a result, now it's going to cancel the relationship. So again, here you're looking at probability. You're looking at increasing the percentage of transactions, activities that are in compliance and the time value and the monetary value of doing that. The last stage is one that is still in many cases the hardest to reach, but also is the one that at the end of the day may have the most value. What you're trying to do here is to improve the contract language where it's failing to achieve the expected result and improve the contract process so you get better and faster contracts. It's understanding where is our contract language failing to give us the hedges, the protections, the qualifications, the entitlements we should have had. As a result, where are we getting business relationships that are not performing? A CLM system can look at these and build a business case around the value of CLM along all 6 aspects of contract creation. So let's bring this home with some final thoughts from my perspective as to what I think needs to be done if you're going to succeed with CLM. And you're going to see some echoing of some of the things that Andy's talked about and I've talked about here. So really 4 key points. Point 1 is you've got to think holistically across the contract lifecycle. You've got to view this as not a single activity of contract creation, but a whole life cycle that mimics the life of that contract from initial ideation to creation to execution to replacement, and supports all those phases of implementation we talked about. Secondly, engage comprehensively. One of the biggest failure points we've seen in CLM is when legal introduces the CLM, but no one else buys into it. When the head of sales buys the CLM, but the legal doesn't involved in that. When companies are successful, they recognize that all these stakeholders need to get involved, both legal and business. They engage with them. They identify whose role is going to come to the fore when, understand which point of value are you going to get when, understand what contributions do you need to make the thing work, the whole implementation work. So you've got to make sure that your vision encompasses contract management, contract compliance, contract optimization phases, not just all the phases up to the contract signature. Now, one of the good things here, and Andy alluded to it, is that there are new functionalities that are coming into CLM, many of them involving artificial intelligence. So you want to take advantage of those. These functions especially are a lot more focused on the later phases of implementation, phases 4, 5, and 6, but they're also making it much easier on the earlier phases. So problems that used to exist, for example, around importing third-party contracts are getting simpler to solve. So to succeed with CLM, keep these in mind. Again, think holistically, engage comprehensively, don't stop when the contract is signed, and work with vendors who can bring these AI functions and other necessary tools you need to make sure that you succeed holistically in your implementation of CLM. And by doing so, capture the full value of CLM implementation.
Great. Andy and Andrew, thanks for a great presentation. Let's turn now to the questions from the audience. As a reminder to the audience, type in your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Great. So the first question is around integrations. And the question comes in from somebody who's anonymous. Does Agileft integrate with central reach for contract provisions, such as fee schedules? That one's for you, Andy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hiro. Great question. And let me take a moment to just talk a little bit more about our approach on integrations. So we have a number of pre-built integrations with leading enterprise software solutions like Salesforce, Microsoft Exchange that are built upon an integration framework that we call ESA. It's short for the external system adapter. So that's an Agileft platform for integration and synchronization of data between Agileft and other enterprise solutions. So in the case of a practice management solution like Central Reach, I assume that Central Reach has an API that would enable us to explore the creation of an integration on our ESA platform that can connect to the Central Reach API to be able to push and pull data from that third-party system. So I think that would be possible. I'm not aware of a specific integration that we've done with Central Reach, but assuming that it has a modern RESTful API, we can leverage the ESA framework to integrate.
Great. Next one is for you as well, Andy. Does Agileft offer AI capabilities to analyze the contract repository?
Yes, so great question. It does. Let me talk a little bit about the use cases of where AI comes to light within the Agileft platform. So the first use case, I think most commonly used for AI is the loading of contracts. So your existing repository, if you're coming from another system or if you're coming from a SharePoint site and you want to get that those unstructured contracts into Agileft, you can use our AI platform to analyze and find the key facts and the clauses within those contracts that will then be used to profile that contract against the data model within Agileft. So that's the first use case of loading contracts into Agileft. The second use case is in support and negotiation. So if you're receiving third-party paper from an outside vendor or customer for a particular contract, you can utilize our AI integrated into Microsoft Word that will analyze the document to, again, identify key facts and clauses and use that to make suggestions to you on clauses that you may need to consider modifying as part of that negotiation and connecting to the clause library to find those pre-approved clauses that you could use within negotiations. And then I think the third use case that I would refer to for the use of AI within Agileft is around contract risk scoring. So we use a number of factors into the calculation of a risk score for a contract that will look at some of the data elements, but it will also make use of contract similarity. So comparing the current contract with a standard contract, your standard contract, to get a measure of similarity that would go into the risk score calculation as well.
Andy, one more for you. Can you upload a third-party contract and develop your own indexing e.g. key terms that is
Yes,
searchable.
yes, exactly, and that's the use case that I just described in terms of supporting the negotiation of third-party paper. So the contract record or the contract request, the user can upload that third-party paper. When that comes to approval or negotiation by a contract approver or negotiator or contract manager, then AI can be used to extract the key facts and identify the clauses within that contract and load that into the contract record.
Okay, one that's a little bit more specific. Does Agileft have an out-of-the-box solution to help track service contract types so the HR department can manage wages and payments to be compliant?
So the beauty of the Agileft no-code platform is the extent to which it can be configurable to match your specific needs for your contracting process. So the answer to that is yes. You can customize the pre-built out-of-the-box contract models that we provide to add in additional data elements that you want to capture for a specific contract type that you're using. And if you've got related data to that contract that are specific to the needs of your business, you can create those additional related data records as well.
Andrew, one for you. Do you have any advice on how one should go about choosing a contract management system?
Oh, that's a very full question, Wilson. But I think the starting point is to really understand what's the contracts that you have. Are they buy side or are they sell side? To understand the complexity, what's the nature of them. They're all standard and simple ones, or are they highly complex and highly variable? The reason you want to understand the buy side or sell side is just decide, do you want to get a CLM that links to the applications that support those relevant processes, support those activities, the buy side or sell side? Because that's going to influence where you want to look. On the other hand, if you do have contracts that are both buy side and sell side, very important, then that tilts you to other vendors who can support both buy side and sell side equally. Obviously, other points of concern, how well does it integrate with your CRM, with your other systems that you have? How much experience does a vendor have in your industry? That actually is a big issue. A vendor that's worked with clients in your industry has already seen many of the contract types that are common. They can help you set up the terms and conditions you'd want to have for in your library. They can help you understand and translate a third-party contract comes in and apply the right metadata tags based upon the training they've done in that industry. So perhaps of all the things that they're experiencing in your industry may be the most important consideration.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So we are a little bit over time. So I want to thank the two Andys for a great webinar. You can check out Agiloft's webinar series on our website, www.agiloft.com. It's right on the homepage. Thanks, everyone. And a recording will be available within 24 hours, again, on our website.